The hands tightened around her throat. The pressure was immediate, suffocating, a cruel force determined to break her down. The cold, unrelenting grip of a man who thought he was in control. Her back slammed against the marble pillar of the City Hall lobby, the sharp impact sending a jolt of pain up her spine. She gasped, her body instinctively fighting for air, for freedom, but his grip only grew stronger. "Step back!" His voice was a growl, filled with authority, filled with hate. I said, "Step back now." A crowd had gathered, lawyers, clerks, civilians, their eyes wide with horror, frozen in disbelief. The echoes of the officer's command bounced off the grand pillars, but no one dared move. She clawed at his wrist, her nails digging into his skin, but he refused to let go. His face twisted in disgust, his eyes burning with something sinister. "You people think you can do whatever you want," he spat, his breath hot, his voice laced with venom. "Walking in here like you own the place, like you have power. But let me tell you something." He leaned in closer, his grip tightening. "You don't. Not here. Not in my City Hall." She struggled, but the officer was strong. Her chest heaved, fighting against the pressure, fighting against the humiliation. A deep silence had fallen over the room. No one stepped in, no one dared to, because to them, she was just another old black woman caught in the crosshairs of a man who had always gotten away with this. The moment stretched into eternity. The air thickened, suffocating, oppressive. The world was watching, but no one was moving. Then a voice sliced through the silence. "Officer, what the hell are you doing?" A man in a dark suit stormed forward, his footsteps echoing against the polished floor, each step radiating fury. His expression was a mixture of horror and righteous anger, his jaw clenched so tightly that it looked like it might snap. The sheer intensity of his presence made the officer hesitate for just a fraction of a second, his grip loosening just enough for her to gasp in a desperate breath of air. But still, the officer's eyes never wavered. He believed he was in control. He thought he was untouchable. "I don't take orders from criminals," he muttered under his breath, his fingers pressing even harder against her throat, his rage deepening, his dominance unwavering. The suited man stopped in his tracks, his hands trembling at his sides. His mouth opened as if he wanted to scream, as if he wanted to lunge forward and stop this madness. But the shock of what he was witnessing held him in place, paralyzing him in the moment. Then a sound broke through the tense silence, the creak of doors swinging open. The heavy wooden doors of the courtroom had been thrown wide with force, their impact echoing throughout the grand hall. Rows of attorneys, clerks, and jurors stood motionless, their faces frozen in expressions of sheer disbelief. The air was thick, electric, charged with an unspoken tension that crackled like lightning before a storm. The officer turned sharply, confusion flickering across his face, uncertainty bleeding into his rigid stance. Something was wrong. Something was very, very wrong. The authority he thought he wielded so effortlessly was slipping through his fingers like grains of sand. For the first time, fear crept into his eyes. And then he saw it, the judge's chair empty. The officer's stomach dropped, the weight of his own arrogance crushing him from within. A chill ran down his spine, spreading like ice through his veins, paralyzing him in a way he had never known. He looked back at the woman in his grip, but the power dynamic had shifted. Her face, once contorted in pain, was now unreadable but unyielding. A storm brewed behind her eyes, something fierce, something undeniable, something that warned him he had crossed a line he could never return from. And then she spoke, her voice steady, sharp, cutting through the silence like a blade. "You just assaulted a sitting judge in her own courthouse." Silence. A deadly, suffocating silence. The kind that drained the air from the room, made onlookers forget to breathe. The color drained from the officer's face, his own disbelief mirroring the horror in the eyes around him. His breath hitched, caught in his throat as if it, too, were trapped in the gravity of what had just happened. His hands fell away from her throat, not by choice, but as if scalded by the truth that had just been spoken. The realization hit him like a truck, unrelenting, unstoppable. His world, his power, his control, it all shattered in an instant, slipping away like sand through his fingers, leaving only fear in its place. The murmurs started slowly, whispers that crawled through the air like fire catching on dry leaves. Someone gasped. Someone else took a step back. The weight of what had just happened began to settle over the room, heavy and undeniable. The suited man exhaled sharply, shaking his head in disbelief. "My God," he whispered. And then the panic set in. The officer took a step back. His heart pounded so loud it drowned out the sounds around him. His mind raced, grasping for an explanation, an excuse, something, anything to undo what he had just done. But there was nothing. No escape, no justification, no turning back, because he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. And what happened next shocked the entire country. The holding cell was cold. The walls painted a dull shade of grey. The officer, Timothy Klein, sat on the metal bench, his hands cuffed in his lap. He had spent his entire life believing he was untouchable. But now he was just another man in a jumpsuit, waiting for the world to decide his fate. Judge Ruth Daniels had been practicing law for over 40 years. At 70, she had seen it all, had fought every battle, had earned every inch of respect she carried. Born and raised in Newark, she had fought to prove herself in a system that was never meant for women like her. She had seen officers like Klein before, had ruled over their cases, had watched them walk free when they should have been held accountable. But this time, it was different. This time, the world had seen it. The trial was relentless. Every second of footage was played, every witness called to the stand. The courtroom that Klein had once controlled was now a place where he had no power. The judge's bruises were visible, a reminder of the violence that had unfolded before an entire city. The prosecution left no stone unturned, presenting a history of complaints against Klein, reports that had previously been dismissed or buried. Witnesses testified, some reliving painful memories of their encounters with him, painting a picture of a man who had long considered himself above the law. The defense attempted to frame his actions as a moment of misplaced passion, a lapse in judgment rather than a pattern of abuse, but the jury was unmoved. Guilty on all counts. The words echoed through the courtroom: aggravated assault, official misconduct, obstruction of justice. His sentence was harsh, 20 years, no parole. A precedent-setting verdict that sent shockwaves through law enforcement and the justice system alike. Judge Daniels watched as he was led away, his head hanging low. She had spent a lifetime fighting for justice, and today, she had won. But it wasn't just about her. It was about every person who had been silenced, every victim who had been ignored. This was a moment of reckoning, a reminder that power unchecked was dangerous, that justice was meant for everyone, not just a select few. As reporters gathered outside the courthouse, the nation debated the implications of the case. Some hailed it as a turning point, a sign that the tide was shifting. Others decried it as an attack on law enforcement, a warning shot against those in power. Regardless of opinion, no one could deny its significance. Timothy Klein would fade into history, just another officer who thought he was above the law. And Ruth Daniels? She would continue to rise, her presence a testament to resilience, to strength, to justice finally being served. But she knew the fight was far from over. This was only the beginning.